My name is Elena, and I'll never forget the way my sister-in-law's laugh sliced through me like a blade, sharp and cold, in the middle of my brother's pristine living room. "You're just a nanny, Elena," she said, her lips curling as if the word itself was a stain. Not family. The room went quiet, the kind of quiet that suffocates, where every pair of eyes, my brother's, my mother's, even the kids I'd raised like my own, averted, leaving me to drown in the weight of her words. I was 24, standing in a house I'd poured my heart into, and in that moment I was nothing. Not to her, not to them, just a nanny, just a shadow in their perfect family portrait. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, the kind where everyone knows your business and nobody expects you to amount to much. My parents were good people, but tired, worn down by factory jobs and bills that never seemed to stop. I was the youngest of three, the afterthought, the girl who was always told to be quiet, to stay out of the way. My brother Michael was the golden child. He was smart, charming, the one who got out, went to college, married a woman with a sharp smile and sharper ambition. Sarah, my sister-in-law, was everything I wasn't: polished, confident, the kind of woman who walked into a room and owned it. I adored Michael, looked up to him, but Sarah, she looked through me. Always had. When I was 18, I moved to Chicago to be closer to them. I didn't have a plan, just a high school diploma and a stubborn hope that I could make something of myself. Michael offered me a job as a live-in nanny for their 2 kids, Lily and Max. I jumped at it. I loved those kids like they were mine, and I thought naively, I know that being there, being useful, would make me part of their world. I cooked their meals, braided Lily's hair, read Max stories until he fell asleep. I was there for every fever, every tantrum, every milestone. But Sarah never let me forget my place. "Don't get too comfortable," she'd say, half joking, half not. "This isn't your house." I laughed it off, swallowed the sting, because what else could I do? I needed the job. I needed them. The night of the incident, we were celebrating Michael's promotion. The house was full family friends, Sarah's colleagues from her law firm. I'd spent the day cooking, cleaning, making sure everything was perfect. I was proud of Michael, proud to be part of his life, even if I was just the help. After dinner, Sarah stood up to give a toast, her glass of wine catching the light. She thanked everyone, her voice warm and practiced, and then her eyes landed on me. "And Elena," she said, pausing, just long enough for the room to notice, "you're such a good nanny. The kids adore you. But let's be clear, you're not family." She laughed a bright, cruel sound, and a few others joined in, nervously, like they didn't know what else to do. My face burned. I looked at Michael, waiting for him to say something, anything, but he just stared at his plate. My mother, sitting across from me, gave me a small, pitying smile, as if to say, "What did you expect?" I don't remember what I said. Something polite, something to smooth it over, because that's what I always did. I excused myself, walked to the kitchen, and stood there gripping the counter, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might break my ribs. I wasn't angry, not yet. I was humiliated, hollowed out. Like every piece of myself I'd given to that family had been thrown back in my face. I wanted to scream, to run, but where would I go? I had no money, no degree, no one else. Just a room in their house and a job that wasn't even mine. That night I lay awake in the guest room, my room, though Sarah always called it the guest room, staring at the ceiling, replaying her words. "You're just a nanny." I thought about Lily and Max, how they'd run to me when they scraped their knees, how they'd beg me to stay when I tucked them in. I thought about Michael, who used to call me his little hero when we were kids, who now couldn't even look at me. And I thought about myself, about the girl who'd come to Chicago with dreams too big for her pockets, who'd let herself believe that love and loyalty would be enough. I was wrong. The next morning I woke up different. Not stronger, not yet, but awake. Something in me had shifted, like a crack in a dam, letting the smallest trickle of resolve slip through. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't stay there not like this. I couldn't keep being the girl who smiled through the hurt, who let Sarah's words carve pieces out of her. I didn't have a plan, but I had a feeling, a quiet, stubborn thing, that I was worth more than this. More than her laughter, more than their silence. I started small. That week, I signed up for night classes at the community college. It wasn't much, just a course in business basics, but it was mine. I paid for it with the little savings I had, money I'd tucked away from birthdays and odd jobs. I didn't tell Michael or Sarah. I didn't tell anyone. It was my secret, my lifeline, something they couldn't touch. Every night after the kids were asleep, I'd sit at the kitchen table with my textbooks scribbling notes, dreaming of a life where I wasn't just the nanny. I was terrified of failing, of proving Sarah right, but I kept going. Because every page I turned, every word I wrote, was a step away from that moment in the living room, a step towards something better. I wish I could say it was easy, that I was brave and bold, but I wasn't. I cried a lot those first few months. I cried in the bathroom so the kids wouldn't hear, cried on the bus to class, cried when I looked at my bank account and saw how little I had left. I felt like I was fighting a war no one else could see. A war against the voice in my head that sounded suspiciously like Sarah telling me I'd never be more than this. But I kept going, because stopping would mean giving up on myself, and I wasn't ready to do that. Not yet. One night, after a particularly grueling class, I stopped by a diner near the college. I was exhausted, my eyes burning from too many hours, staring at a screen, my heart heavy with doubt. That's when I met Rosa. She was a waitress, maybe 60, with a warm smile and eyes that saw right through you. She poured me coffee, asked me why I looked like I was carrying the world on my shoulders. I don't know why I told her, maybe because she asked, maybe because I was so tired of holding it all in, but I did. I told her about Sarah, about the kids, about the classes I was barely passing. She listened, really listened, and when I was done, she leaned across the counter and said, "You're not just anything, Elena. You're you." And that's enough to start with. Rosa became my anchor. She'd save me a booth at the diner, slip me extra fries, ask about my classes. She told me stories about her own life, how she'd come to Chicago from Mexico with nothing, how she'd worked 3 jobs to put her daughter through school. She didn't sugarcoat things, didn't tell me it would all be okay, but she believed in me. And that belief, small as it was, kept me going. It was the first time in years I felt like someone saw me, really saw me, not as a nanny or a sister or a disappointment, but as Elena. Just Elena. I didn't know it then, but that crack in the dam was widening. The trickle was becoming a stream, and soon it would be a flood. I wasn't ready for what was coming, but I was starting to believe I could handle it. For the first time in my life, I was starting to believe in myself. Rosa's words stayed with me, like a song you can't stop humming, even when the world tries to drown it out. "You're not just anything, Elena." I'd repeat it to myself. On the bus to class, in the quiet moments when I was folding Lily and Max's laundry, when Sarah's voice would creep back in, sharp and mocking. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me moving forward, one shaky step at a time. Those early months at the community college were brutal. I wasn't used to studying, not really. High school had been a blur of getting by, and now at 24, I was sitting in classrooms with kids who seemed to know exactly what they were doing. I felt like an imposter, like any moment someone would stand up and say, "What's the nanny doing here?" But no one did. And I kept showing up. The classes were only part of it. Living with Michael and Sarah was like walking on eggshells that were already cracked. I tried to stay invisible to do my job and keep my head down, but Sarah had a way of finding me, of reminding me where I stood. One evening, I was helping Lily with her homework at the kitchen table, when Sarah came home, her heels clicking like a metronome. She dropped her briefcase on the counter, glanced at us, and said, "Elena, don't let her get too attached. You're not her mom." It was casual, tossed out, like it was nothing, but it landed like a punch. "Lily's sweet." Lily looked up at me, confused, her pencil frozen mid-word. I forced a smile, ruffled her hair, and said, "Let's finish this problem okay." But inside I was unraveling. I wanted to scream, to tell Sarah that I loved these kids, that I'd been there for them in ways she never was. But I didn't. I never did. Michael wasn't much better. He wasn't cruel, not like Sarah, but his silence was its own kind of betrayal. He'd come home late, kiss the kids goodnight, and barely look at me. Once, when I tried to tell him about my classes, he nodded distractedly and said, "That's great, Elena. Just don't let it interfere with the kids." It wasn't mean, not exactly, but it was a reminder. My dreams, my life, they were secondary. Always had been. I think that hurt more than Sarah's barbs, the way my own brother, the one who used to carry me on his shoulders when I was little, couldn't see me anymore. Or maybe he did, and he just didn't care. I started spending more time at the diner with Rosa. It was my safe place, a corner of the world, where I wasn't the nanny or the screw-up sister. Rosa would slide into the booth across from me during her breaks, her apron stained with coffee, and we'd talk. She told me about her daughter Sophia, who was a nurse now, and how proud she was of her. She told me about her own dreams, the ones she'd let go of to survive, and how she saw something in me, a spark, she called it. "You're stubborn, Elena," she said one night, her eyes crinkling. "That's good. Stubborn gets you places." I laughed, but I held on to that word, stubborn. It felt like a compliment, like something I could be proud of. School was getting harder. The business course was fine, but I'd added an English class and it was kicking my butt. I wasn't a writer, not by a long shot, but there was something about the stories we read, about people who fought against the odds, who found their voice that lit something up in me. I started writing in a notebook, nothing fancy, just thoughts, feelings, things I couldn't say out loud. It was messy, raw, but it was mine. One night I showed a page to Rosa, just a paragraph, about how it felt to be invisible in Michael's house. I was embarrassed, sure she'd laugh, but she didn't. She read it slowly, her lips moving, and when she looked up, her eyes were wet. "This is you, Elena," she said. "This is your spark. Don't hide it." That notebook became my lifeline. I'd write during my breaks on the bus in the middle of the night when the house was quiet. I wrote about Sarah's laugh, about Michael's silence, about the kids, and how much I loved them even when it hurt. I wrote about my mom, who'd always told me to be grateful for what I had, even when what I had felt like scraps. I wrote about Rosa, about the diner, about the way her belief in me made me want to believe in myself. It wasn't just writing, it was like I was carving out a piece of my soul, giving it shape, making it real. But life doesn't stop just because you're trying to change. One night I came home late from class, exhausted and starving, to find Sarah waiting for me in the living room. The kids were asleep, the house dark, except for a single lamp. She was sitting on the couch, her arms crossed, her face tight. "We need to talk," she said. My stomach dropped. I knew that tone. She told me I'd been slacking lately, that the kids were complaining about me being distracted, that I wasn't pulling my weight. It wasn't true Lily and Max were as happy as ever, but I didn't argue. I couldn't. She went on, her voice low and deliberate, saying that if I couldn't handle the job, they'd have to find someone who could. "We've been generous, Elena," she said. "Don't make us regret it." I stood there, my backpack heavy on my shoulder, my throat tight. I wanted to tell her I was trying, that I was doing my best, that I was more than just her nanny, but the words wouldn't come. I nodded, mumbled an apology, and went to my room. I didn't cry, not that night. I was too tired, too empty. Instead, I opened my notebook and wrote. I wrote about how small she made me feel, how her words were like weights pinning me down. But I also wrote about Rosa, about the spark, about the stubbornness that was starting to feel like strength. I wrote until my hand cramped, until the words blurred, and when I was done, I felt lighter. Not better, not yet, but lighter. The next day, I went to the college library and looked up scholarships. I didn't know what I was doing, but I knew I needed a way out. I couldn't keep living in Sarah's house, under her thumb, letting her define me. I found a few programs for non-traditional students, women like me. who were starting late, who didn't have much but had a lot to prove. I spent hours filling out applications, writing essays about my life, about why I deserved a chance. It was terrifying putting myself out there, admitting how much I wanted this. But I did it. I mailed them off my heart in my throat, and I waited. Weeks passed and nothing came. No letters, no calls. I started to think I'd been foolish, that Sarah was right, that I was reaching for something I'd never touch. But Rosa wouldn't let me give up. She'd check in, ask about the applications, tell me to keep writing, keep fighting. "You're not done yet, Elena," she'd say, and I'd nod even when I didn't believe her. Then one day I got a letter. It was thin, and I was sure it was a rejection. But I opened it anyway, my hands shaking. It wasn't a rejection. It was an acceptance, a partial scholarship to a 4-year university, not fancy but real. They wanted me, Elena, the nanny, the nobody. They saw something in me. I didn't tell Michael or Sarah. I didn't tell anyone except Rosa. We celebrated in the diner, just the two of us, with coffee and pie. She snuck from the kitchen. She hugged me, her arms strong and warm, and said, "This is just the start, mija." I believed her. For the first time in a long time, I believed I could be more than what they thought of me. I wasn't there yet, but I was moving, and that was enough. The letter from the university felt like a secret I carried in my pocket. A fragile thing I was afraid to look at too closely in case it disappeared. I didn't tell Michael, or Sarah didn't even tell the kids, though Lily caught me smiling one day and asked why I looked so happy. I brushed it off, said I'd had a good day, but inside my heart was racing. A scholarship, a real university. It wasn't full funding, and I'd have to figure out loans and a job, but it was a door-opening one I hadn't dared imagine. Every time I felt Sarah's eyes on me, or heard her sharp little comments, "Elena, the dishes are piling up," or "Don't forget your place," I'd think of that letter, and it gave me just enough strength to keep going. But strength doesn't mean the hurt stops, and those months were some of the hardest of my life. I was still living in their house, still waking up at dawn to get the kids ready, still swallowing my pride every time Sarah spoke to me, like I was less than her. The difference was I had a purpose now, something to hold on to when the days felt endless. I'd go to my night classes, then head to the diner to study where Rosa would keep my coffee warm and my spirits up. But the exhaustion was bone deep. I was burning out, stretching myself so thin I could feel myself fraying. I'd catch my reflection in the bus window, dark circles under my eyes, hair pulled back in a messy bun, and wonder if I was fooling myself. Could I really do this? Could I really become someone new? Someone more than the nanny Sarah laughed at. One night I hit a wall. It was a Thursday, and I'd failed a quiz in my English class. It wasn't a big deal, not really, but it felt like the end of the world. I'd stayed up all night, studying, skipping sleep, to finish a paper, and still I'd gotten a D. I sat in the diner staring at the graded paper, the red ink blurring as tears welled up. Rosa slid into the booth across from me. Her apron crinkled and asked what was wrong. I didn't want to tell her. I was ashamed, embarrassed that I'd let her down, let myself down. But she just waited, her eyes soft, and eventually it all spilled out. The quiz, the exhaustion, the fear that I wasn't smart enough, that Sarah was right all along. "I'm trying so hard," I said, my voice breaking. "But what if it's not enough? What if I'm just nothing?" Rosa didn't say anything at first. She reached across the table, took my hand, and held it tight. Her hands were rough, calloused from years of work, but they were warm, steady. "Elena," she said, her voice firm but kind, "you're not nothing. You're fighting. That's more than most people ever do. You're allowed to fall, but you don't get to stay down. Not you." She squeezed my hand, then got up to grab a slice of pineapple, my favorite, and set it in front of me. "Eat," she said. "Then go home, sleep, and try again tomorrow. You're not done." I don't know why, but that moment broke something open in me. Not the quiz, not even Rosa's words, but the way she looked at me like I was worth believing in, even when I couldn't believe in myself. I ate the pie, went home, and slept for 10 hours. The next day, I went to my professor's office, something I'd never had the courage to do before. I was nervous, sure she'd think I was wasting her time, but she didn't. She was kind, patient, and helped me understand where I'd gone wrong. That D didn't define me. It was just a step, a stumble, not the end. That was when I started to change, really change. Not all at once, not in some dramatic montage, but in small, quiet ways. I got better at managing my time, carving out hours to study, even when I was exhausted. I started speaking up in class, timidly at first, but with more confidence as the weeks went on. My grades improved, not to A's, but solid B's enough to keep my scholarship hopes alive. I kept writing in my notebook too, pouring out my fears, my dreams, my anger. It wasn't just a diary anymore, it was a map, a way to see where I'd been and where I was going. But the house was still a battlefield. Sarah seemed to sense something shifting in me, and she didn't like it. She'd make little digs. Oh, Elena's off to her little classes again, or give me extra chores when she knew I had a big assignment due. Once she accidentally left my textbook on the counter, soaked in coffee, and laughed it off, saying, "You're so careless, Elena." I wanted to scream, to throw the book at her, but I didn't. I dried the pages, kept studying, kept moving. Michael, as always, stayed out of it. I think he was afraid of her, or maybe he just didn't want to rock the boat. Either way, his silence cut deeper every day. The kids, though, they were my light. Lily would draw me pictures, little crayon masterpieces, of us holding hands, and Max would tell me stories about dragons and knights, always making me the hero. They didn't care about Sarah's rules or my place in the house. They loved me, and that love was pure, uncomplicated. But it hurt too because I knew I'd have to leave them someday. The scholarship, if I could make it work, meant moving to a new city, starting over. I'd miss their laughter, their sticky hugs, the way they made me feel like I mattered. But I couldn't stay for them. I had to go for me. One evening, I was tucking Max into bed when he asked me why I was always so tired. I hesitated, then told him the truth, or a version of it. "I'm going to school, buddy," I said, "so I can be someone important someday." He looked at me, his eyes big and serious, and said, "You're already important, Elena. You're my favorite." I hugged him so tight I thought I might break, and when I left his room, I cried. Not sad tears, not exactly, but something else, something like love and loss and hope all mixed together. Rosa kept me grounded. She'd started calling me Mika, like I was her own, and it made my heart ache in the best way. She'd tell me stories about her life, about the times she'd wanted to give up but didn't, and I'd listen, soaking up her strength. One night she gave me a small silver necklace, a simple chain with a tiny star pendant. "My mother gave this to me when I left home," she said. "It's for courage. Wear it when you're scared." I put it on the metal cool against my skin, and I never took it off. It was a reminder of Rosa, of my own stubborn spark, of the fact that I wasn't alone. By the end of that semester, I'd gotten another letter, an offer to transfer to the university the following fall with a bigger scholarship if I could maintain my grades. It wasn't a guarantee, and the money was still a problem, but it was real. I was so close I could taste it. I started looking for part-time jobs, anything to save up for the move. I didn't tell Sarah or Michael, but I think they knew something was up. Sarah's comments got sharper, her eyes colder, like she could smell my defiance. Michael started asking questions. "You seem busy, Elena. Everything okay?" But I kept it vague. I wasn't ready to share this with them. Not yet. I was scared, more scared than I'd ever been. Leaving meant giving up the safety of their house, the kids, the only life I'd known in Chicago. But staying meant giving up on myself, and I couldn't do that anymore. Rosa's necklace, my notebook, the letters from the university, they were my armor, my proof that I was more than Sarah's laughter, more than Michael's silence. I was Elena, and I was fighting. For the first time, I felt like I might actually win. The summer before I left for the university was a blur of sweat and secrets. I'd gotten a part-time job at the diner with Rosa, bussing tables and pouring coffee on weekends. when Sarah thought I was running errands. It wasn't glamorous, my feet ached. My apron was always stained, but every tip I slipped into my savings felt like a brick in the foundation of my new life. I was still living in Michael and Sarah's house, still tucking Lily and Max into bed, still dodging Sarah's barbs, but I was different now. I could feel it in the way I carried myself, the way I didn't flinch. When she made her little comments, "Elena, you look tired. Don't overdo it." Her words still stung, but they didn't sink as deep. I had a plan, a purpose, and it was mine alone. The scholarship covered most of my tuition, but I'd need to pay for housing, books, and food. I took out a small student loan, my stomach twisting as I signed the papers. Debt scared me. My parents had always warned against it, but I told myself it was an investment, not a trap. I was investing in me, in the Elena who wrote in her notebook, until her hand cramped, who wore Rosa's star necklace like a talisman. I found a cheap studio apartment near the university, a shoebox with peeling paint, and a leaky faucet, but it was freedom. I'd lie awake at night, imagining it my own space, my own rules, a life where no one could tell me I wasn't enough. Leaving the kids was the hardest part. Lily was 8 now, old enough to sense something was changing. She'd ask why I was always so busy, why I had so many books. Max at 5 just wanted me to stay. "Don't go, Elena," he'd say, clinging to my leg, and I'd hug him tight, promising I'd visit. I loved them so much it hurt like a bruise. I couldn't stop pressing, but I couldn't stay for them, not if it meant losing myself. I started preparing them little by little, telling them I was going to school to learn new things, that I'd always be there, Elena, even if I wasn't there every day. They didn't understand, not really, but they trusted me. That trust was a gift, and it broke my heart to think I might let them down. Rosa was my rock through it all. She'd train me at the diner, showing me how to balance trays and charm customers, but more than that, she'd listen. I'd tell her about my fears, failing out, running out of money, proving Sarah right, and she'd nod her eyes steady and say, "You're scared because it matters, mija. That's how you know it's worth doing." She gave me practical advice, too, how to budget, how to shop for groceries on a dime, how to stand up for myself without losing my cool. She was teaching me how to survive, not just in school, but in the world. One night after a long shift, Rosa pulled me aside and handed me a small envelope. Inside was $200 crisp bills she'd saved from her tips. "For your apartment," she said, before I could protest. "You're not alone, Elena. You don't have to do this by yourself." I tried to give it back, but she wouldn't take it. I cried right there in the diner, my arms around her, feeling like I'd found a family I didn't know I needed. That money wasn't just cash, it was love, belief, a reminder that someone saw me and thought I was worth betting on. Moving day came faster than I expected. I packed my things in secret stuffing clothes and books into duffel bags I hid in the guest room closet. I didn't tell Michael or Sarah until the last minute, partly because I was scared, partly because I wanted to prove I could do it without their permission. The night before I left, I sat them down in the living room. The kids were asleep, the house quiet, except for the hum of the air conditioner. I told them I was moving out starting school, that I'd found a place of my own. Michael looked surprised, maybe a little proud, but Sarah's face was a mask. "That's ambitious," she said, her voice cool. "I hope you know what you're doing, Elena. The kids will miss you." It was the closest she'd ever come to kindness, but it felt like a warning, like she was waiting for me to fail. I left the next morning, my bag slung over my shoulder, Rosa's necklace glinting at my throat. Lily and Max hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, and I promised I'd call visit, be there for them. Michael drove me to my apartment, his hands tight on the wheel. He didn't say much, but when we got there, he helped carry my bags and said, "I'm proud of you, kid." It was the first time in years he'd sounded like my big brother, and I wanted to believe him, but I couldn't shake the years of silence. I nodded, thanked him, and watched him drive away, my heart heavy but my resolve stronger. The university was overwhelming at first. The campus was huge. The classes harder than anything I'd done at community college. I was older than most of the students, a 25-year-old freshman, surrounded by kids who seemed to know exactly where they were going. But I found my rhythm. I studied in the library until it closed, worked shifts at a campus coffee shop to cover my bills, and kept writing in my notebook. My English professor, Dr. Carter, noticed my work. She was tough, the kind of teacher who didn't hand out praise lightly. But one day she pulled me aside after class and said, "You have a voice, Elena. Don't be afraid to use it." She encouraged me to join a writing group, and though I was terrified, I did. The writing group was a revelation. It was a mix of students, some like me, older and scrappy, others young and confident, and we'd share our work, our stories, our truths. I read a piece about Sarah's laugh, about the night she'd humiliated me, and when I finished, the room was quiet. Then one girl, a poet with purple hair, said, "That's real, that's powerful." Others nodded, and for the first time, I felt like my pain, my story mattered. I wasn't just the nanny anymore. I was Elena, the writer, the student, the woman who was clawing her way up. By the end of my first semester, I was thriving. My grades were solid, I'd made a few friends, and I'd even gotten a small grant for non-traditional students, easing the pressure of my loans. I visited Lily and Max when I could, calling them every week to hear about school and dragons and all the things they loved. Sarah was polite when I came by, but distant, like she was sizing me up. Michael was warmer, asking about my classes, but I kept my answers short. I didn't trust them, not fully. I'd learned that my dreams were mine to protect, not theirs to approve. One day, I got an email from Dr. Carter. She'd submitted one of my essays to a campus writing contest, and it had won second place. It came with a $500 prize and an invitation to read at a university event. I was stunned. Me, the girl who'd barely passed high school, was going to read her words in front of strangers. I called Rosa, my voice shaking, and she laughed proud and loud. "See, Mija, I told you. That sparks a fire now." The event was small, just faculty and students, but when I stood at the podium, my essay in my hands, Rosa's necklace catching the light, I felt something new: pride, not just in what I'd done, but in who I was becoming. I didn't know it then, but that reading was the start of something bigger. People started to notice me, not just as a student, but as a voice, a story. I was still scared, still struggling, but I was winning little by little. And every win, every step, was a brick in the wall. I was building a wall no one, not Sarah, not Michael, not the world, could tear down. Standing at that podium, reading my essay to a room of strangers who actually listened, changed something in me. It wasn't just the $500 prize, though, that paid for a month's rent and a new pair of shoes that didn't pinch my toes. It was the way people looked at me, after the way they nodded, clapped, asked questions. Like my words mattered. For so long, I'd been the girl in the background, the one who cleaned up messes and kept her mouth shut. But that night, I was someone else, someone who had a story worth telling, a voice worth hearing. I went home to my tiny apartment, sat on my lumpy couch, and cried. Not from sadness, but from a kind of joy I hadn't known I could feel. It was like I was meeting myself for the first time, and I liked her. School got easier after that, not because the work was less, but because I believed I could do it. I threw myself into my classes, especially writing. Dr. Carter became my mentor, pushing me to dig deeper, to take risks with my words. She'd mark up my essays with sharp, thoughtful notes, but she'd also write things like, "This is brave, Elena. Keep going." I did. I wrote about my childhood, about the way my parents' exhaustion seeped into everything, about Michael's silence, about Sarah's laugh that still echoed in my dreams. I wrote about Rosa, too, about the diner and the necklace, and the way she'd saved me without even knowing it. Writing wasn't just a class anymore. It was how I made sense of the world, how I claimed my place in it. I was still working at the campus coffee shop, pulling espresso shots and wiping down tables, but even that felt different. My coworkers were students like me, juggling classes and jobs, and we'd laugh about our professors, our late-night study sessions, the way we lived on ramen and hope. I made friends, real friends, not just people I worked for or lived with. There was Jenna, a biology major who loved to sketch, and Marcus, a history nerd who could quote entire speeches from memory. They'd drag me to campus events, poetry slams, movie nights, protests for causes I was just starting to understand. I was shy at first, afraid I didn't belong, but they made space for me, and slowly I started to feel like I did. Money was still tight. The scholarship and grant helped, but I was always one bad day away from a crisis. Once my laptop crashed, and I had to spend 2 weeks' tips to fix it, eating nothing but cereal to make rent. Another time, I got a parking ticket I couldn't afford, and I sat in my apartment, staring at the bill, wondering if I'd made a mistake. But I'd think of Rosa, of her $200, and her belief in me, and I'd find a way. I picked up extra shifts, sold some old clothes, kept going. Stubborn, she'd called me, and she was right. I visited Lily and Max as often as I could, driving back to Michael and Sarah's house every few weeks. The kids would run to me, their arms wide, and for a moment everything felt right. But Sarah was colder now, her politeness thinner, like she could sense I was slipping out of her control. She'd make comments about my little adventure at school, her smile sharp enough to cut. Michael was better asking about my classes, but he still didn't get it. He'd say things like, "Don't push yourself too hard, Elena," as if he thought I'd break. I didn't tell them about the writing contest, the friends the way I was building a life they couldn't touch. It wasn't worth the fight. One day I got an email from the university's literary magazine. They wanted to publish one of my essays a piece about being invisible in a house full of people. It wasn't a big deal, just a small campus publication, but to me it was everything. Seeing my name in print, my words on a page someone else might read, made me feel real, like I wasn't just a shadow anymore. I sent a copy to Rosa, and she called me, her voice thick with pride. "You're a writer, mija," she said. "Don't let anyone tell you different." I framed the magazine, hung it on my wall, a reminder that I was doing this, really doing it. That spring, I applied for an internship at a local nonprofit that helped low-income women get education and job training. It was unpaid, but it was a chance to do something meaningful, to use what I was learning. I wrote a cover letter that poured out my heart about growing up with nothing, about fighting for my place, about wanting to help others do the same. I didn't expect to get it, but I did. The director, a woman named Carla, with a warm laugh and a no-nonsense attitude, said my essay stood out. "You've got fire, Elena," she told me. "We need that." I started that summer organizing workshops, writing grant proposals, talking to women who reminded me of my mom, of Rosa, of myself. It was hard, but it felt right, like I was finally on the path I was meant to be on. My confidence grew, but so did the stakes. I was taking harder classes, juggling the internship, the coffee shop, and my writing. I barely slept, living on coffee and adrenaline, but I didn't care. I was alive, more alive than I'd ever been. I started submitting my work to bigger contests, even a few national ones, and though I didn't win, I got honorable mentions feedback that said I was close. Dr. Carter pushed me to apply for a scholarship for junior year 1 that would cover full tuition and a stipend. It was competitive, and I doubted myself, but she wouldn't let me back out. "You're ready, Elena," she said. "Show them who you are." I wrote the application essay in one feverish night, my fingers flying across the keyboard. It was about the night Sarah laughed at me, about how it broke me, but also woke me up. I wrote about Rosa's necklace, about the kids, about the stubborn spark that kept me going. It was raw, maybe too raw, but it was true. I sent it off my heart in my throat and tried not to think about it. But I dreamed about it, about standing in a room full of people, holding a certificate, proving I was more than they thought. That summer I got the call. I'd won the scholarship, full tuition, a stipend, even a small travel grant for research. I was sitting in the diner when the email came, and I screamed loud enough to make the other customers jump. Rosa ran over, thinking something was wrong, but when I showed her the email, she hugged me so tight I couldn't breathe. I knew it, she said, tears in her eyes. I knew you could do it." We celebrated with pie and coffee, the same way we'd celebrated the first scholarship. But this time it felt bigger, like I'd crossed a line I could never uncross. I didn't tell Michael or Sarah. I wanted to see their faces, but I wasn't ready. Not yet. I was still building, still proving not just to them, but to myself. I moved to a slightly bigger apartment, one with a real bedroom and a window that let in morning light. I bought a cheap desk, set up my books, my framed magazine, my notebook. It was mine, all mine, and every time I walked through the door, I felt like I was coming home. I was 26 now, halfway through college, and I was winning. Not just at school, but at life. I had friends, a purpose, a voice. I wasn't the girl in the guest room anymore, the one who cried herself to sleep. I was Elena the writer, the intern, the woman who wore Rosa's necklace and carried her own fire. I didn't know what was coming, but I was ready, or at least I thought I was. Winning that scholarship was like stepping into a new skin, one that fit me better than the old one ever had. I was 26, a junior now, and for the first time I felt like I belonged, not just at the university, but in the world. The stipend meant I could quit the coffee shop, giving me more time for my internship and my writing. I was still tired, still stretched thin, but it was a good tired, the kind that comes from building something real. My apartment, small as it was, became my sanctuary. I'd sit at my desk, Rosa's necklace, catching the light, and write until the words blurred each sentence, a step toward the woman I was becoming. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving, and it felt like a miracle. The internship at the nonprofit was where I started to shine. Carla, the director, saw something in me, a hunger she called it, and gave me more responsibility. I wasn't just organizing workshops anymore. I was leading them, standing in front of women who'd been knocked down by life, telling them they could get back up. I shared my story, not all of it, but enough the girl who'd been called just a nanny, who'd fought her way to college, who was still fighting. They listened, their eyes locked on mine, and when they nodded, when they thanked me, I felt like I was giving them something I'd needed for so long, hope. Carla started calling me her star, and though I laughed it off, it meant everything. Someone saw me, not as a shadow, but as a light. My writing was taking off too. The literary magazine published another piece, and Dr. Carter pushed me to submit to an anthology for young writers. I sent in an essay about Rosa, about the diner and the necklace, and the way she'd taught me to believe in myself. It was accepted, and when I saw my name in the table of contents, I cried not the quiet tears of my old life, but big messy sobs that left me laughing. The anthology came with a small honorarium, $200, the same amount Rosa had given me for my apartment. I used it to buy her a new apron embroidered with her name, and when I gave it to her, she hugged me so tight I thought my ribs might crack. "You're my family, mija," she said, and I knew she meant it. School was still hard, but I was good at it now. I'd learned how to study, how to ask questions, how to push myself without breaking. My grades were strong, mostly A's, and I was on track to graduate with honors. Dr. Carter nominated me for a Student Leadership Award, and though I didn't win the nomination alone, was enough to make me feel seen. I was speaking up in classes, joining panels, even helping organize a campus event for first-generation students. People knew my name not just as Elena, but as Elena the writer, Elena the advocate, Elena who'd come from nothing and was making something of herself. I still visited Lily and Max, though it was harder now with my schedule. They were growing up. Lily was 9, Max 6, and every time I saw them, I felt a pang of guilt for leaving. But they were proud of me in their own way. Lily would show me her drawings, now full of stars and books, and say, "This is you, Elena, at your school." Max would tell me I was super smart. His eyes wide, like I was a superhero. I loved them fiercely, but I knew I'd made the right choice. Staying would have meant giving up on myself, and I couldn't do that, not even for them. Sarah, though, was another story. She'd stopped being polite, her comments now openly biting. "You're getting a bit full of yourself, aren't you, Elena?" she'd say when I mentioned a class or an event. "Don't forget where you came from." I wanted to tell her I hadn't forgotten that her laugh, her cruelty, was the fuel that kept me going, but I didn't. I smiled, nodded, kept my distance. Michael was better, but not by much. He'd ask about school, say he was proud, but it always felt like he was humoring me, like he didn't really believe I'd make it. I stopped expecting him to understand. My family wasn't the one I'd been born into anymore. It was Rosa, Carla, Jenna, Marcus, the women at the nonprofit, the people who saw me and lifted me up. That fall, everything started to accelerate. The anthology got some attention, and I was invited to read at a regional literary festival. It was small, just a community center in a nearby town, but it was my first real stage. I practiced for weeks, my voice shaking as I read my essay to my empty apartment. When the day came, I wore Rosa's necklace and a dress I'd bought secondhand, my heart pounding as I stepped to the microphone. The room was full, maybe 50 people, but it felt like 1,000. I read about Rosa, about the diner, about finding my spark, and when I finished, the applause was loud real. A woman in the audience, older with gray hair and kind eyes, came up after and said, "Your story moved me. Don't stop telling it." I floated home, my chest full of something I could only call joy. The festival led to more opportunities. A local newspaper interviewed me about the anthology, and I talked about my journey, about being a first-generation student, about the women who'd helped me along the way. The article was small, buried in the arts section, but it was mine. People started recognizing me on campus, saying they'd read my work, that it resonated. I was invited to speak at a women's empowerment event, a bigger stage this time, with a real spotlight. I was terrified, but I said yes. I wrote a speech about resilience, about how pain can break you or build you, about choosing to build. I practiced until my throat was raw, and when I delivered it, the room was silent, then erupted. People stood, clapped, some cried. Carla was there beaming, and later she said, "Elena, you're not just helping yourself anymore. You're helping all of us." I was starting to see it too. The women at the nonprofit would tell me my workshops gave them courage, that my story made them believe they could try again. Students in my writing group said my feedback pushed them to be better. Even Jenna and Marcus, who teased me for being a big deal, said I inspired them to take risks. I wasn't used to this being someone who mattered, who made a difference, but I was learning to carry it, to stand taller under its weight. By spring, I was applying for senior year scholarships and even a few graduate programs. I wanted to keep writing, maybe teach, maybe work with nonprofits full-time. I didn't know exactly what my future looked like, but I knew it was mine to shape. I was no longer the girl who'd stood in Sarah's kitchen, gripping the counter, humiliated and hollow. I was Elena with a voice, a purpose, a fire that no one could put out. But the past has a way of catching up. One day I got a call from Michael. He sounded strange, nervous, not like himself. "Elena," he said, "we need to talk. It's about the house." I didn't know what he meant, but my stomach twisted. I'd been so focused on my own world, I hadn't noticed the cracks in theirs. I agreed to meet him not at their house, but at a coffee shop near campus. When I saw him, he looked tired, older, like the golden boy had finally started to tarnish. He told me things I wasn't prepared for, things that would change everything. But that's a story for another moment, one I wasn't ready to face just yet. For now, I was still climbing, still shining, still becoming the woman I'd always known I could be. Michael's face across the coffee shop table was a map of worry lines, etched where I'd once seen only confidence. He stirred his coffee, the spoon clinking against the mug, and I weighted my hands tight around my own cup. The call had come out of nowhere, his voice on the phone shaky, asking to meet here, not at the house. I'd been so caught up in my own world classes, the nonprofit, the speeches, the anthology, that I hadn't seen this coming. When he finally spoke, his words hit like a storm I hadn't braced for. "The house," he said, his eyes not meeting mine, "it's not in my name. It never was. It's in yours." I stared at him, my mind scrambling to make sense of it. The house, their house. Sarah's pride, the one I'd lived in as a nanny. The one where she'd laughed and called me, nothing was mine. It sounded like a joke, a cruel one, but Michael wasn't laughing. He told me about our grandmother who'd passed when I was a teenager. I barely remembered her, just a quiet woman with kind eyes who'd send me birthday cards with a $5 bill tucked inside. She'd owned the house, an investment property she'd rented out, and when she died, she'd left it to me, not Michael. My parents, not wanting to burden me, had kept it quiet, letting Michael and Sarah live there, assuming I'd never know. But now, with their marriage unraveling Sarah's affair, Michael's debts, the truth had come out. The deed buried in a lawyer's office had my name on it. Elena Marie Torres, me. I didn't know what to feel. Shock maybe, or anger, or something heavier I couldn't name. All those years scrubbing their floors, folding their laundry, swallowing Sarah's insults, and the house was mine. I wanted to laugh, to cry, to scream. Michael kept talking, explaining how they'd taken out loans against it, how they couldn't afford the payments now, how Sarah was furious, blaming him. Blaming me. I didn't know Elena, he said, his voice breaking. I swear I didn't know. I believed him, but it didn't make it hurt less. My brother, the one I'd looked up to, had built his life on a lie, and I'd been the collateral damage. I left the coffee shop in a daze, Rosa's necklace, heavy against my chest. I didn't go back to my apartment. I went to the diner to Rosa, because she was the only one who'd understand. I told her everything, my words spilling out like water from a broken dam. She listened, her hands folded on the table, and when I was done, she said, "This is your power, mija. Not the house, but what you do with it. You decide who you are now." Her words steadied me, reminded me of the woman I'd become, the one who'd fought for her education, her voice, her place. I wasn't the girl Sarah had laughed at anymore. I was someone else, someone stronger. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. I hired a lawyer, a pro bono advocate Carla recommended, to sort out the deed. It was real, my name, my house tangled in loans, but legally mine. I could sell it, keep it, do whatever I wanted. But first I had to face them. Michael called asking me to come to the house to talk. I didn't want to go, didn't want to see Sarah's face, but I knew I had to. This was my moment, the one I'd been building toward without even knowing it. When I walked into their living room, my living room, everything felt different. The furniture was the same, the kids' toys scattered on the floor, but I wasn't the nanny anymore. I was Elena, the woman with the deed in her hand. Sarah was there, her face pale, her usual sharpness dulled by something like fear. Michael stood beside her, looking small, defeated. The kids were at a friend's house, thank God, because this wasn't for them. This was for me. Sarah spoke first, her voice tight. "Elena, we can work this out. You don't need the house. We'll pay you back whatever you want." It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was close. I looked at her, at the woman who'd made me feel like nothing, and I felt, not anger, not anymore, but clarity. "You laughed at me," I said, my voice steady. "You called me just a nanny, said I wasn't family. But this house, it's mine. It always was." I held up the deed, the paper trembling in my hand, not from fear, but from the weight of it all. "You don't get to decide who I am anymore." The room was silent, the kind of silence that presses against your skin. Michael looked at his shoes, his face flushed with shame. Sarah opened her mouth, closed it, then said, "I didn't mean it, Elena. I was wrong. It wasn't enough. Not after everything, but it was something. I didn't need her apology, not really. I needed this moment, this reckoning, to close the wound she'd opened all those years ago. I didn't make any decisions that day. I told them I'd think about the house, that I'd talk to my lawyer, that this wasn't about revenge, but about what was right. I left them there in the house that was mine, and walked out into the Chicago evening, my heart pounding but light. I'd faced them, faced her, and I hadn't crumbled. I'd stood tall, my voice clear, my worth undeniable. The news spread somehow. Maybe Michael told someone, maybe Sarah did. By the time I got back to campus, people knew. My friends Jenna and Marcus threw me a small party in my apartment, toasting to Elena, the queen of comebacks. Carla called me into her office, hugged me and said, "You're a force girl, don't forget it." Even Dr. Carter, usually so reserved, smiled and said, "This is your story now, Elena. Write it well." I was invited to speak at another event, this time a citywide conference for women in education. My name was on the program not as a student, but as a speaker, a role model. I told my story, the nanny, the scholarship, the deed, and the audience. Stood their applause washing over me like a wave. The moment went viral in a small way. A clip of my speech ended up on social media, shared by the conference organizers, then by local influencers. People commented, called me inspiring, a phoenix rising. I wasn't used to the attention, and part of me wanted to hide, but another part, the stubborn part, the spark Rosa had seen, knew this was mine to claim. I wasn't just a nanny anymore. I was Elena, the woman who'd turned pain into power, who'd taken a deed and made it a declaration. Michael and Sarah were quiet after that. Michael texted saying he was sorry that he'd always be my brother. I didn't reply, not yet. Sarah sent a letter, a real one, apologizing for her words, her cruelty. I read it, folded it, put it away. I wasn't ready to forgive, but I wasn't burning with anger either. I was free or close to it, and that was enough. I kept the house for now, not to live in, but as a reminder of my grandmother, of my worth of the life I was building. I was still writing, still speaking, still helping women at the nonprofit find their own sparks. I was graduating soon with offers for graduate school and a job at the nonprofit if I wanted it. The world was opening, and I was ready to step into it, not as Sarah's nanny, not as Michael's sister, but as Elena. Just Elena. The spring of my senior year felt like standing on the edge of something vast, a horizon I could finally see. I was 27 weeks away from graduating, my cap and gown hanging in my closet like a promise. The house, the one that had been mine all along, was still in my name, its future undecided. I wasn't ready to sell it, not yet, but I wasn't going to live there either. It was a symbol now, a weight I carried not as a burden, but as proof of what I'd overcome. Every time I thought of Sarah's laugh, of that night in the living room, when she'd stripped me bare with her words, I'd picture the deed in my hand, my name in bold. It wasn't revenge, not anymore. It was redemption, and it was mine. I'd become someone on campus, not in a flashy way, but in the quiet, steady way that matters. Students I didn't know would stop me in the library saying they'd heard me speak, or read my essays, seen the clip from the conference. "You're the nanny girl, right?" they'd say. And I'd smile, nod, because I wasn't ashamed of that girl anymore. She was part of me, the root of my strength, the one who'd kept going when the world told her to stop. My professors, especially Dr. Carter, treated me like a colleague, not just a student. She'd started talking about my career as a writer, a word that still felt too big, like a dress I wasn't sure I could fill. But I was trying it on piece by piece. The nonprofit had become my second home. Carla offered me a full-time job after graduation, not just as a workshop leader, but as a program coordinator, helping design initiatives for women like me, first-generation low-income underestimated. I loved the work, the way it let me give back, the way it reminded me of Rosa's Diner, where belief was served alongside coffee and pie. I was still speaking at events too, my story spreading beyond Chicago. I got an email from a national women's organization inviting me to keynote their annual gala in New York. Me keynoting in a room full of people who'd paid to hear me. I said yes, my hands shaking, as I typed the reply, Rosa's necklace warm against my skin. Lily and Max were still my heart, though seeing them was harder now. They were growing up, Lily, 10, Max 7, and their world was shifting. Michael and Sarah were separated, living apart, the house, a quiet battleground they'd both left behind. I'd take the kids for weekends when I could, bringing them to my apartment for pizza and movies, trying to shield them from the chaos. They'd ask about the house, about why I didn't live there, and I'd tell them it was complicated, that I loved them no matter where I was. Lily, sharp as ever, would watch me with those big eyes and say, "You're happy now, Elena." I can tell. Max would just hug me, his arms tight, and I'd hold him back, promising I'd always be there, even if it wasn't every day. Michael tried to rebuild our relationship, but it was slow, fragile. He'd leave voicemails about wanting to talk, to make things right. Once he showed up at my apartment, his face drawn, and apologized not just for the house, but for everything. For his silence, his distance, for letting Sarah tear me down. "You were always the strong one," he said, his voice rough. I should have seen it. I listened, nodded, but I didn't let him in, not fully. I wasn't angry, not like before, but I wasn't ready to trust him either. He was my brother, but he'd failed me, and that scar was still there, even if it was fading. Sarah was another story. Her letter sat in a drawer unread since the day I'd received it. I saw her once at a school event for Lily, and she looked different, smaller, her sharp edges dulled by time or guilt or both. She tried to talk to me, her voice soft, almost pleading. "Elena." "I'm so sorry," she said, her eyes wet. "I was wrong about everything." I looked at her, the woman who'd laughed at me, who'd made me feel like nothing, and I felt nothing. Not hate, not pity, just a quiet detachment. "I know," I said, and walked away. I didn't need her apology anymore. I didn't need her at all. Graduation was the pinnacle, the moment I'd been running toward since that first night class. The ceremony was in May, the campus green with spring, the air thick with possibility. I walked across the stage, my name echoing through the speakers. Elena Marie Torres, Bachelor of Arts, cum laude, and the crowd cheered, but I only heard Rosa. She was there in the front row, her face beaming, her new apron. Swapped for a dress she'd bought just for this. When I stepped off the stage, she hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, whispering, "This is yours, mija. You earned it." Jenna and Marcus were there too, whooping like I'd won an Oscar, and Carla, who handed me a card that said, "The world's waiting for you." That night we celebrated at the diner, the same booth where I'd cried over a failed quiz, where Rosa had given me her necklace, her money, her belief. We ate pineapple, always apple, and laughed until my sides hurt. I looked around at Rosa, at my friends, at the life I'd built, and I realized I was whole. Not perfect, not finished, but whole. The girl who'd stood in Sarah's kitchen, humiliated and hollow, was gone. In her place was me, Elena, the writer, the advocate, the woman who'd turned pain into purpose. I still hadn't decided about the house, but I was leaning towards selling it, using the money to start something new, a scholarship maybe in my grandmother's name, for women like me who needed a chance. I didn't need the house to prove my worth anymore. My worth was in my words, my work, the people I'd helped, the life I'd made. I wore Rosa's necklace every day, its star a reminder of the spark she'd seen, the fire I'd grown. I was still writing, still speaking, still fighting, not just for myself, but for everyone who'd ever been told they were just anything. As I stood in my apartment that night, looking out at the city lights, I thought about Sarah's laugh, about the deed, about the journey that had brought me here. I didn't hate her, not anymore. I didn't need to. My life was my answer, my victory, my truth. I thought about the women I'd met at the nonprofit, the ones who'd listened to my story and found their own courage. I thought about Lily and Max, who'd grow up knowing their Elena was a force. And I thought about you, whoever you are, watching this, maybe feeling like you're not enough, like the world's already decided who you are. Here's what I know: your worth doesn't depend on someone else's validation. Not your family's, not your partner's, not the world's. It's in you, in the stubborn spark that keeps you going, in the quiet moments when you choose yourself. You don't need a deed or a degree or a stage to prove it. You just need to keep fighting, keep building, keep believing. You are enough exactly as you are. And if you ever doubt it, remember me. Elena the nanny. The nobody who took a laugh and turned it into a life. I don't know what's next, not exactly. New York maybe, or graduate school, or a book I'm starting to dream about writing. But I know I'm ready, not because I'm fearless, but because I've learned to carry my fear and keep going. I've got Rosa's necklace, my notebook, my story. I've got me, and that's more than enough.